right, and welcome to Fast Break Breakfast, NBA podcast. My name is Keith, here for a solo interview episode with Monty McCutchen, former NBA official, current head of referee training and development, NBA vice president. I'm not sure the official title, but Monty McCutchen, if you're an NBA fan like I am, you know who he is, you recognize him. This is an absolute joy for me. He came on the show last year. He spoke for 45 minutes, all about some of his favorite NBA moments, some rules that were going to be changed. We broke some news on Fast Break Breakfast, talking about the upcoming rule changes. It was very exciting. I am just extremely excited again to have him back on for almost an hour, talking all about the new rule changes, the difficulty of codifying rules and just writing them out, and the problems with traveling, and how well the officials do, even though critics will point out there's always missed calls, just how kind of amazing the job and how hard it is. I think when you listen to him explain all the travel rules, we talk about some very famous traveling plays that were on Shaqtin' a Fool, and how they're just confusing, and how the common conception of what a travel is just slightly off, and how they've had to not adjust but just write down some stuff because of guys like James Harden and Manu Ginobili, guys who were doing things that are within the rules, but when fans watch, sometimes they get outraged or upset, saying that's a travel, and no, it's not. Based on the way the rules are written, it's not a travel. And so they're working on that this season. One of the points of education for officials, as you've probably noticed in the preseason, is to cut down on travel. So they're working on that. I also really press him on all the instant replay, the added instant replay. We talk about the coach's challenge, which I think is a terrible idea, but it's going to be humorous. On Tuesday night, on opening night of the NBA, I think the coaches were all over 3 on their challenges. I'll be interested to see which coaches are the best at it. So while the officials and Monty don't write the rules, he advises and helps, and then it's his job to implement the rules by training the officials. So I asked him, kind of try to get his subjective opinion on that, just on the use of replay and how that's changed the games and how that makes endings of games anticlimactic sometimes. So if you're just an intense NBA nerd, and if you like the basketball rules, and if you've ever tried to referee basketball, I hope you will enjoy this. Again, an absolute joy for me to do. When we started doing Fast Break Breakfast, it was obviously a hobby. It still is a hobby, but the idea that I would get to talk rules with this guy is just, when I look back, it's really cool. So I hope you guys will enjoy it. Again, it's a deep dive on rules and maybe minutia, but I think you'll like it. And at the very end, Monty mentions like the fortuitous circumstances of how we met. It is just kind of funny. If you remember from last year's episode, you probably don't, but I was telling the story of how 3 years ago at Vegas Summer League, I was on the same rental car shuttle from McCarran Airport to the rental car lot, and Monty gets on the bus, and I'm like, that's Monty McCutchen, I'm going to go talk to him. And I approached him and just started talking to him. I was like, hey, are you Monty McCutchen? He's like, yes, I am. And I told him, I was like, I have an NBA podcast, and I'm just interested in basketball rules. And we talked a lot about how there was a playoff game that season where the last 2-minute report said the officials missed something like 5 or 6 calls in the final 13 seconds. And I said, I disagree. That last 13 seconds was beautiful. It was one of the best endings if we had an NBA game. I don't know what they expected of you guys. It was just a pell-mell scramble. And I guess because of that, he found that interesting, that I liked it. And we started talking from then. And then the next year, he agreed to come on the podcast. And then this summer, he agreed to come back on as well. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Monty McCutchen. My guest today was an NBA referee for 25 years and is currently the NBA Vice President, Head of Referee Development and Training, Monty McCutchen. Monty, welcome back to Fast Break Breakfast. How's it going?
It's going well. It's always good to be here, Keith. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have you back on. We always start our shows talking about breakfast. I want to know if your breakfast routine has changed at all now that you no longer have to do the mandated 3 referee weigh-ins a season?
Well, it changed when I first took this job, that's for sure. I rather enjoyed that relief from those 3 weigh-ins, much to my own detriment, I might add. But I've gotten myself in order over the last 4 or 5 months and have returned myself to my former glory and have lost quite a bit of weight, so I'm thrilled. My breakfast has definitely changed. It's much more simple, less grains, more, simple proteins and a little fruit, and away we go.
What were some of the splurge breakfasts when you finally decided to maybe just let yourself live a little bit, let the hair down?
Well, if I was in Los Angeles, I sure made my way by Roscoe's Fried Chicken and Waffles. I can sure tell you that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But a waffle did some damage to me there for about 14 months.
That's great. Also, I know since you've left the on-court role, I've seen you with a very large beard. Do you still have the large beard?
No, I cut that off. That was a summer beard.
Oh, summer
which
beard.
I rather enjoyed. Yeah, rather enjoyed some of my return to my feral roots in Texas. But you get back up here to New York and you turn a few heads, you realize that when in Rome. And so I do have a beard, but it's very light, sort of, the 4 or 5 day version in which I keep it trimmed up and somewhat civilized.
I didn't know if there was any jealousy among the NBA official ranks when their overseer or overlord or whatever your preferred term could be, when you're rocking the very large beard and everyone else is keeping it very, very shipshape.
Keith, let me be very clear about something. No one is ever jealous with how I dress or in my beard length. In fact, I think most people are quite happy with their choices in life when they see me stroll into a room.
Well, I would say your sartorial splendor is a bit much for me. I don't know if I could pull it off, but the beard, I am absolutely jealous. I love it. I thought your beard looks awesome. I normally have a very large beard. I currently don't as well. I'm actually also kind of shaved down for the start of the NBA season, but you look very good with the beard. I hope we see it return. I
appreciate it. Thank you.
So you have been kind of the face of the NBA as far as maybe explaining some rules to fans and on NBA.com. And you've explained to me before that you don't write the rules, and that's also for our listeners. You don't create the rules. The officials don't write the rules. There's the competition committee, the board of governors has to approve them, and you don't even get a vote on those. But they do look to you, I guess, for some feedback, is my understanding. So I do want to talk about some of the rule changes that are going to happen with this current NBA season. I think the biggest one, the one that's going to be most noticeable to even casual fans, is the NBA is introducing a coach's challenge. Can you explain to me what was the motivation or the people who were proponents of this rule change, why that's something they wanted to see added to the NBA?
Well, I think in particular, we saw a huge appetite for it from our fan base. And, when we're a very receptive league, when it comes to our fan base, we like to be in tune. Now, it has to make sense. And that's the reason we have the vetting process that we do with our competition committee. And then, of course, whatever is recommended by our competition committee ultimately has to be voted on by the board of governors. And I think that appetite for it, with other professional sports leagues having that avenue for coaches, both strategically and to make sure that the egregious miss does not impact the game at critical times, drove this through our competition committee to have viable discussions about it, in which we looked at the pros and cons. One of the things that is probably most important to get out is that this is an experimental introduction of this. It's been okayed for 1 year and 1 year only at the current state. And we've kept it very tight in its scope for the very reason that we want to understand that over the course of the year, we'll have a broader sense of data, we'll have a broader sense of contextual relationships to the play itself and how coaches have used it strategically, but also how does the written rule as it currently is tight in scope, how could it potentially be altered to more fully serve the game. Ultimately, all the innovations that we do at the NBA, both for on-court and off-court interaction to the game, want to serve the game. We don't want it to be there for its own sake. It must serve a greater purpose, which ultimately we serve competition to our fan base. And we have, and I'm biased, of course, I think we have the best competition in the world. We have the best people playing. We have the best athletes in the world, in my opinion. And I just think that what we innovate has to serve those players, those coaches, those franchises in which the game itself is bettered by this technological or innovative approach to it. By keeping the coach's challenge tight in scope, you may challenge three things: a foul that is called against you, no calls. You may challenge a goaltend that is called against your team, no calls. And you may challenge an out of bounds that goes against your team. The goaltend and the out of bounds, you may challenge only for the first 46 minutes of the game. In the last 2 minutes, we allow our officials to use the current triggers in place to get to instant replay on goaltend and out of bounds by their own decision making. And the reason for that is that we didn't want to limit an out of bounds or a goaltend in the most critical parts of the game to only one opportunity. As you can well imagine,
Right.
There are many out of bounds in the last 2 minutes that become very close in nature. And we didn't want to have a game impacted negatively because a coach had to only choose between one of those. So our old rules apply in that regard. Strategically, I think there's a lot of excitement about how the coach's challenge will be used. Some teams will take an analytical approach that a three-pointer in the middle of the third quarter is still 3 points, and that's the time to challenge. Other people might take a more approach that I want to save it for the ends of games, much like it was used in our experimental phases in the G League, and they may save it towards the end. And I think that'll be fascinating to see how each team sort of approaches the strategic component to it. And I think ultimately it allows for, and this is the most important reason that I think that it gained esteem in the competition committee, is that officiating is a highly practiced, worked at craft by our staff. It really is. That doesn't mean, though, that we're perfect and we make mistakes, and no one is bothered by that more than officials. And I think that the coach's challenge gives one more opportunity for an egregious miss that might impact a game to have an avenue to be correctly adjudicated, and that's important to everyone, including officials. I think there's a great misnomer out there that officials won't want to change their call because of their ego or their pride. That is highly contrary to my own experience as an official for myself, and I think it's highly it's just not accurate to the staff at large. We're an integrity-based group, and we want to get plays right. And we recognize we make mistakes in real time. The only thing worse than missing something in real time, played by the quickest, fastest, biggest athletes in the world, is to be bullheaded, go over to the replay, and miss it with multiple angles at your disposal.
Right.
And so I think that it's really important that people understand referees want to get plays right. And if they have a tool within the rules to get plays right in real time or several seconds later via the use of instant replay, either through our triggers that we have at the referee's disposal or through a coach's challenge, referees are eager to serve the game properly. That means getting plays right and making sure that the play on the floor is what constitutes the talk the next day instead of any errors made by officiating.
So I might be in the minority on this. I'm dubious on the...
You liked my beard. You're in the minority.
No, there you go. Well, I do pride myself in being in the minority of a lot of things. On this, I'm dubious on how well the coaches are going to handle it, and I'm dubious on how well it'll affect... Or I feel like it might have a negative effect on just the flow of the game, watching the game. I remember this is very anecdotal, but like the first time I saw this used was in Las Vegas Summer League, where a Mavericks player, clear to the naked eye, knocked the basketball out of bounds. Then the Mavericks coaching staff was like, hey, did we knock that out? And every player on the Mavs said, no, I didn't touch it. So then they used their timeout, challenged it, lost the challenge. I thought it was very funny. I was like, well, there goes that challenge. So we're now we're adding this extra scrutiny on the coaches, who I guess the coaches want this power, apparently. I saw Rick Carlisle was a big proponent for it, but like it seems like that's going to backfire on them. And then as far as the flow of the game, I'm worried now, like we get to the end of the game, and I don't know, like how do you balance, or how does the competition committee balance the term you use, serving the game, as far as getting the calls as accurate as possible, and how do they balance that with what is the entertainment value or the flow of the game in keeping like multiple several minute long reviews out of the final 2 minutes of the game? So how do you think that balance exists, where you have to think, do we want to get the calls absolutely right to frame by frame replay, or do we want to have maybe a more enjoyable flow of the game at the end of the basketball games?
Well, I think you've hit upon one of the central figures of all use of instant replay, and not just the coach's challenge, is the exact balance we are trying to find, is what is the amount of instant replay that can be used that serves the game without detracting from the very things that you talked about. No one wants to sit around while Jeopardy music plays, on countless activities while we look at replay. That being said, our franchises and our fan bases tend to want their cake and eat it too. They want game flow, which we do in the league office, of course. But then if we miss a play, then it's told, we have this technology at our disposal. How can they not use it? And so the competition committee is constantly searching for that very balance that you talked about. In regards to coach's challenge, I think that's one of the reasons that you see you get one challenge for the game and one challenge only, even if you're successful. Remember, this is an experimental rule that's been placed in place for one season. And the data that we're accumulating are very important to the central question you've just asked, which is, wherein lies that balance to flow and getting the calls right? We think the tight end scope beginning that we've taken to this, which is one challenge and one challenge only, is the way to begin. And then at the end of the year, we'll have a better understanding of, did it affect flow in a highly negative way? Did we not get enough calls correct because we didn't give a successful challenge another challenge? And I think more information, a year of understanding how it will play out in real time, will give us a more clarified view of our future and how Coach's Challenge can impact the very thing you've raised.
Yeah, it's gonna be intriguing to watch and have fans, I guess, argue the next day on whether their team should have saved their challenge. If there's a no call on the last shot of the basketball game. And this is also, I think, when I try to think of negative consequences or things I don't prefer as a fan, it's the final shot of a game goes up. It looks like my team, there's a foul call. I'm like, all right, maybe tie basketball game or down by 1 or something, and my team is going to get 2 shots or even 3 shots, at the foul line to win the game, and then the other team challenges the foul call, and then we have a 2-minute review, like not even knowing, like we thought something good happened, now maybe something bad happened. And I guess that's the argument where people aren't going to agree. Like, would I rather win a basketball game, even if it's a missed call, or would I rather sit around and wait for that? I don't know. Just it feels anticlimactic, and I feel like I see it in a lot of sports. Like, I'm a casual fan of the NFL, and there was a game on Sunday where like the Chargers and the Titans, my hometown team, were playing, and it was comical, the number of touchdowns that were called and then uncalled in like the last 30 seconds of that football game. And same with European soccer with VAR. I guess that's just the balance. And maybe it is just a subjective thing of what people prefer. Are there any other consequences that you raise or that you imagine could be difficult for the referees as far as the implementation of this rule, or the increased scrutiny that might be on officials because of this rule?
Well, I think that anytime that you introduce something new, there's a growing pains period. I think one of the things that you raised earlier, this idea of unintended consequences, in which we have a concept that's based on time and proximate distance to the foul that's being challenged, and so one of the things that you might do or see as an unintended consequence is a coach will challenge that the foul is not on player A1. He doesn't think that's a foul, let's say. Mm-hmm. And then you go and you find that the coach was right. The foul was not on A1, but your best player, A2, reached in and grabbed, a half a second before, and now that your best player just fouled out of the game. Right. You thought you were challenging So there's all these things that have to be taken into consideration, and there'll be a learning curve for all the game participants. Our referees are really great, though, at one thing, at numerous things. I don't want to narrow that to one thing. That sounds poor. But what they are great at is that when you put a rule in front of them, they will learn it, and they will ask the appropriate questions, and they will get us to a place where they can think of many different things as they see plays in live action that'll help clarify where the coach's challenge should be headed, and or what things should be added or what things should be detracted. Now, all of those questions that referees and coaches and general managers and owners ask of us then go to the competition committee, and they get vetted through the process. And I think that highlighting that process is so very important because so many different stakeholders have excellent views on the NBA game that we want that process in place so that many different perspectives are considered before decisions end up being made. And when you have a good, healthy, robust process like that, you feel comfortable about where you end up, either in an experimental phase that we're in this year or in a more permanent phase, if that's the way that the league decides to go in the future from all its stakeholders, then we'll have a better understanding of all these different questions you're asking and how they will play out over a longer period of time.
A final question on the coach's challenge. Is the scope limited of the challenge to, like, if it's a shooting foul, can you then say like there's a shooting foul and LeBron James is the shooter? Is it limited to just action that occurs to like the guy who's shooting the shot, like to LeBron James in that example? Or could you look on the replay and say, oh, actually Anthony Davis is committing an offensive foul during this shot? So is it limited to just to the shooter, or is it limited to like every player on the court?
It's limited to the foul that was called.
Okay.
All right. Or the goaltend or the out of bounds. So, for example, let's just take one quick example, and I'll give you two scenarios. In one scenario, we have a missed travel prior to the foul. We cannot go back in time and get that travel that was prior to the foul, all right, because you're challenging fouls. What you can challenge, though, is or what is reviewable once you challenge a foul is, was continuation legal? And so, if you have a foul right when LeBron James, to use your example, picks up the basketball and he's fouled, so it's 2-shot foul, but then he takes 4 steps to the basket before he scores. That's not a legal continuation.
Sure.
It's not so much the traveling that you're adjudicating, although that's the specific, but it's an illegal continuation that we would be allowed to rule on. That player, in this case, your example, LeBron, would get 2 free throws because he had picked up the basketball, but he would not be allowed continuation because there was an illegal continuation. No different than if he had used his off arm to wipe out a secondary defender, right? We don't want that illegal act to be allowed. And so there are some nuances to it that our referees will be excellent at adjudicating that will have some unintended consequences, as you bring up. But we're comfortable that the tightness of the scope that we've introduced for this year will allow us to have a better understanding as we move forward. And we're excited about it.
So another rule that uses replay that I've grown again personally weary of is the clear path rule. Last summer when you were talking to me, you're
on a Quixote search to end this clear path. I understand that.
you told me last summer, you're like, we're going to simplify it, we're going to fix it, and I was very happy. And then when I saw it again, I was like, oh, this is the same thing. I don't like this at all. I know my understanding.
You want it gone. You don't.
I want it gone. I want to give your well-trained referees the freedom to see the play happen and say, like much like the G League and the in Summer League, y'all did the experimental transition take foul, where that, like, I guess you guys have to spell it out and codify it. But to me, it's more like they understand it. That was a transition opportunity. There wasn't a play, like a legitimate play to play the basketball. I like that more. I guess just going to my understanding of the clear path rule was it was implemented to dissuade people from fouling. They thought the punishment was severe enough with 2 shots in the basketball that we're trying to dissuade these fouls because we want transition opportunities to happen. We want the highlight dunks. We want the highlight blocks on fast breaks. We want these highlights to happen so we have a clear path to foul to dissuade people from doing it. So after a couple years of these replays, which I hate, does the NBA have any data that players have been dissuaded from doing these fouls? Like, is the clear path foul working as intended?
Well, yes is the answer. I don't have the data in front of me. I mean, the real question you would have to ask, though, is how many of those would we have if the clear path was not in place?
Yeah.
And so if we had 40 last year, which I think is somewhere around the number of the previous season, if we had 40, that may be 40 opportunities for fast break breakfast to, wring its hair out every morning. But if their rule was not in place, we might have had 200 of those. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the question really is there a rule in place that encourages good play? The problem with it is that coaches almost invariably are distraught when their player does a clear path foul. But often what leads to a clear path is a poor play, a bad pass, a stolen dribble. And it's very hard in real time to get that player who is upset with themselves for making a poor play not to want to kill the play out of frustration from the previous play. And so while they understand the rule logically, emotionally in the real moment, it's very difficult to change behavior sometimes.
Right.
That being said, it would only go up without this ability to say, hey, don't do this. And I do think that we don't want just like we don't want take fouls, and that's why we're experimenting with it in the G League. We don't want you to pay the price of exciting basketball for one foul. And I think that rules need to be in place to make sure that we encourage good defensive play and not a opportunity to kill good play through a previous poor play.
Right. And to be clear, in case I misspoke, I like the clear path foul rule. I like the take foul rule that they're experimenting with. I don't like the replay. I think we try to get the clear path rule to prevent these, to prevent defenders from doing this play. I don't want to spend even if like best case scenario, I don't want to spend 60 seconds trying to figure it out. I am willing, and this is where you have to defend your officials. I'm willing for the official to get it wrong on this play. Like if we see it's the fast break, they call the foul. If it was a take foul or if it's a clear path foul, it's either 1 or 2 free throws. I'm fine with that. I do like that. I applaud that idea. Reviewing it for me takes away, like the rule exists for entertainment, but we've created this thing that's incredibly unentertaining to fix it.
I think one of the reasons that instant replay is instigated in that regard is because the penalty is so strong. Mm-hmm. And so there's a desire to get that right. Remember, referees don't come up with what the triggers are to get them to replay. But if you give them the rule, then it would be very wrong of them to ignore the opportunity to get the rule right and then find out later, oh, I could have used instant replay. I did not, and we still got the play wrong. That leads to a double criticism that our officials, conversely don't want to endure. That being said, I think you've tipped upon something that is really important, which is instant replay is often one of the triggers for most instant replay or many instant replays is doubt. And you're always trying to find a balance between true doubt that arises in an official, which I can tell you occurs in an NBA game. No one goes through an NBA game with this assuredness of their abilities that everything they did that night was right. Not if they're honest with themselves. That's most certain. And I think one of the balances you try to find is, do I have true doubt, or am I using this instant replay to placate a coach? Am I using this ability to use instant replay as a crutch for having a more solid approach to your officiating, which is to be really locked in and concentrating? And I think that from that perspective, we try to preach good craft here at the NBA. I want NBA referees who are sharp, who bring their sense of concentration and their commitment to the game every night, not people who show up and have lazy minds that use instant replay as a crutch. That's not what we're preaching. Never will you hear me say, just go to instant replay and be sure.
Yeah.
That's not the use of it. The use of instant replay is, wow, this is a complex game. I have doubt on this play, and that's the standard we use at the NBA level for this specific play, is if I have doubt, I should go to instant replay and be sure. And that's what we try to preach.
And now for a little break to pay some bills. This episode of Fast Break Breakfast is sponsored by mybookie.ag. Use promo code BREAKFAST and they will match your deposit 100%. mybookie.ag. Promo code BREAKFAST.
Hey, Fast Break Breakfasters. Do you think you like sports? Do you think you really get a charge from watching the game? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. Come on down to mybookie.ag, slap a couple hundo on a game, and feel your life flash before your eyes every time a ball is shot. I promise. That's how it goes. That's how it works.
So if you don't have a pickle in your life, if you don't have your own personal bookie, you can go to mybookie.ag, place your sports wagers there, get that extra boost that Uncle John feels when he's watching the sporting events.
You can do it from your phone. You don't even have to call some weird guy.
Maybe you hear us talking about NBA over-unders or futures, and you want to bet, but you don't know how. mybookie.ag is how.
Go to mybookie.ag and enter the promo code BREAKFAST.
You use that code, and MyBookie will match your opening deposit 100% up to $1,000.
mybookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid.
So I've been complaining about these rules. Do you have, I know you have to be diplomatic, but do you have a least favorite rule? Or when you were refereeing, did you have a rule that you were like, guys, we gotta fix this?
Well, I think for a referee, what you look for is not the philosophical side of a least favorite rule, but you see rules that have a potential because you live it every day. You see rules that have a potential to be adjudicated with a loophole or something along those lines that you would like to, when we first put in the use of instant replay for the restricted area, you could use it for about 80% of the restricted area rule, but for whatever reason, this 10%, 20% was not allowed to be used. And I think that those are the kinds of inconsistencies in our rule that an official is attuned to very acutely. And I think that those are some of the types of things that weigh on you because you're hopeful that those kinds of scenarios don't take place, so that you don't have that inconsistency in the rule. Now, that being said, when you are adjudicating a game to the complexity of an NBA game, there are no set of rules that can cover every scenario. And that's just the nature of how words work as approximants. I don't know if it's you and I that talked about this year, but all words are approximants to some degree or another. If I say a blue sky, there's 30 different versions of what you might think of and what I might think of in my head. We have different words, 3 or 4 different words for snow, but if you go up and live up in the Arctic, they've got a lot more words for snow up there because there's so many different types of it. And I think that rules are always sort of constantly doing their best to encapsulate potentialities of infractions. But that's not a perfect science any more than the actual adjudication of the game is. And so I think that there's always some of those that slip through the cracks that we'd like to see tightened up a little, but that doesn't mean that there's a perfect solution for that. Case in point, your questions about Coach's Challenge. We realize it's tight in scope, but it can't cover everything right now. That's why we're looking for more data points so that our rules can be more inclusive of what actually happens consistently in an NBA game. And then we want rules that address that so that players, both offensively and defensively, have an equal expectation of being able to compete with their passion every night. That's the goal of all rules.
So you talked about how when you're writing the rules, how it's difficult, just the what words mean and how to spell out what happens on a basketball court to actually write down every rule. I reffed like for 6 years, I think, when I was younger. And I remember reading like the high school.
I know some of the parents told me about it, Keith.
I'm sure. I wish I raised to that level of ire, but I think anyway. I remember reading a rule book and being like, "Guys, have you read a basketball rule book? It's crazy. Like it's hard to read. Like just the way they call stuff." But anyway, one thing that the NBA did this year that hadn't been specifically spelled out was about gather, like how you gather the ball, trying to spell out. I guess as far as officiating travels, a lot of it based on like James Harden's step backs or people being confused, like the LeBron James crab dribble. So the NBA added wording in the rule book to define what the gather was. And I guess one of my questions as a viewer, like, is there a gray area on the gather? Like if Giannis Antetokounmpo dribbles the ball once at like his opponent's 3-point arc, and ends up taking like 6 steps while that ball's coming back up to him, which is all perfectly legal. And then he grabs it, and then he takes 2 more. Like sometimes it's like, was that the gather there? Was it 3 steps after that? Was it 2? And then you have the highlight videos, and I'm guilty of this for the engagement. Like you show the clip, and you're like, what is that? 9 steps, 10 steps, or whatever. So is there any gray area, especially with some of these elite athletes, of trying to discern like that? Oh, right then, that's the gather, and then he gets 2 steps.
Well, we have certain demarcation lines for sure.
Yeah.
Now, there's no, as the rule is written, it's not gray in the sense of if we are allowed to go frame by frame.
Yeah.
The rule is written very clearly in that regard. In real time, the recognition of it, I think, is tantamount to what a referee should be looking for. And that's one of the things that I think that most often is probably a little confusing is that as the game has changed, remember, 20 years ago, people the size of Kevin Durant and Giannis, and Dirk Nowitzki, we can list this, our 7-footers who were highly athletic that have innovated and changed our games. They're covering a distance that 6'1" people have not covered in the past, with similar moves. And that's just the innovation of the game. I do think it's important, though, to recognize that not only did we define the gather, but we are changing how referees sequence their eyes to these types of plays so that we can discern the gather more clearly. For years, when I came into the league, you were taught to referee the defensive player because that's in a half-court game that was played from the free throw line down to the baseline that was where all your trouble is a congested game. Fouls were your problem. So you trained your eyes to look at the defensive player to make sure that fouls were not taking place. But now we're in a much more wide open game. A vast majority of the game is played from the free throw line up now. And our picks are taken up at the free throw line above, at the top of the key, off of the elbow. And so the game is a more open game. And so we're recognizing that there's offensive players playing in space now. And so we have the time, if we train our referees properly, to go to the gather, find the pivot foot, wait on the legal release of the dribble, and then go to the defensive player. So to take your example of what is the gather is controlling the ball, either one-handed or two-handed, in such a way that you have enough control to pass or shoot the basketball. Often, in the description that you raised with Giannis, while he puts that ball down on the floor on a dribble, yes, that dribble has not ended. He can cover as much ground with that long dribble as he is legally allowed to do. And no, the gather is not taking place by definition, clearly, when the ball is still out of his hands on the ground. And so when that ball comes up to his right hand, one of the questions you could ask yourself is, would he legally be allowed to dribble again under the conditions you find him at that moment? So, for example, if his hand goes underneath the basketball, he would not be legally allowed to dribble again. That would be a carrying violation at that point if he dribbled again. And so that would be the gather if his hand was underneath the basketball. Not to be confused with the side of the basketball which it would be legally allowed to dribble again. He could do a crossover dribble per se. If he takes that legal side of his hand, the gather goes as he moves it over to his left hand, and the left hand becomes part of the basketball, and now he can pass or shoot with that control. Other one-handed ways that you could gather without the hand being underneath the ball is if your hand is big enough to palm the basketball, and the ball comes to a pause because you palmed it. The dribble had ended, that is your gather. Or a la Manu Ginobili, one of our past players who was excellent at this, cradling the ball up against your chest with one arm, a la like a football player, your gather has occurred the second you cradle it. So we have very clear demarcation lines of what is a gather. Now, in real time, in real action, does every referee see every gather perfectly? Of course not. But we are training our officials to get their eyes to the legal gather so that our count can start and we don't have more egregious errors that occur after the gather.
Right. That's very helpful. Actually, that's a good explanation. There's a really famous traveling play. I don't know if you're aware of it. There's this Corey Brewer dunk where he
yes, I've seen it.
Okay, so you can count it out. I feel like on Shacked a Fool, they counted out something like 11 steps. But it's so hard when you watch it to be like you said, he could still dribble up until maybe the last 3 steps, like he still could have dribbled. Right. He takes maybe one extra gather. So I still think he only took 3 steps. I do think it's a travel, but did he was the gather at the last second? And is that famous play actually legal?
All right. So no, it was not legal.
Okay, good.
It was legal from the time the second hand touched the ball.
Right.
In this case though, one step prior to that, Corey lets his hand, if you'll watch it in slow time, Corey lets his hand underneath the basketball. He then puts one more dribble down and then takes it from his right hand to his left hand and takes his 2 interpreted during the game as legal steps, when in fact he had his hand underneath the ball 1 step before. Now, for the sakes of entertainment, Shacked the Fool gets to say whatever he wants in his section. It has his name on it. Shaq gets to say whatever he wants during Shacked the Fool. and listen, Shaquille is wonderful for our league and is a very gregarious man and a good ambassador for our league. But it wasn't as egregious in real time as it might have appeared when they put it on his segment. That being said, the ball did come under, his hand did go underneath the ball prior to that last dribble, and it was a traveling violation. I can't argue that.
So when I'm feeling like I want to come to the defense of the NBA officials online, a lot of times like a play like that where you spell out it seemed until the last split second he might have dribbled again, but he did not. He carried it. He traveled, and sometimes things look strange. To an official, that's like with Manu Ginobili when he kind of he was one of the people who brought the Euro step to the NBA. A lot of fans were like, that's a travel because that looked weird. And so I feel like officials sometimes, it seems like you guys have to understand, if it's just because something looks weird, it's not a travel. And maybe you let something go because you don't want to take away a legal play. So I don't know. Is that true? Is there a philosophy?
Let me go into that a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, there is. There is. I think it's very important to understand that referees are trained individuals. We spend a lot of time training to the rule. If we go to the standard of, hey, if it looks funny, something illegal must have taken place, that may work in 5th and 6th grade boys and girls refereeing. It doesn't work at the NBA level. We have the best athletes on the planet. And when you see a perfect example is the Eurostep, because someone innovated the game and created something that hadn't been done before, when you break it down up against the written rule, it is legal. And we can't be, wow, that looked really funny while I'm sitting on my couch and having, chips and dip. And therefore, I'm just going to make a decision. We live in a world of consequences as referees, historical consequences in which teams are impacted, coaching staffs are impacted, franchises are impacted, players are impacted. And that takes a training and a discipline. And our discipline says, call what you see, not what you think you might have seen. Because if you do that, then you're taking on sort of a hero perspective of officiating. I and I alone am out here working this game. But that's not the case. The truth of the matter is that we are a team just like both teams that are competing that night. We have 3 referees on the game at any given time. And those men and women are trained to help one another. And the idea is that if I have a closed look, if I have an angle that is not open to me, then I must trust. Just like I got to trust the extra pass as a player, I must trust that my 2 partners might have the open look and will do their work and get this illegal act taking place. Because I can guarantee you, guessing as an NBA official is not a 50-50 proposition. You lose 90% of the time, you guess correctly 10% of the time. And when we have 3 people who work our mechanic system that is based on teamwork and trust and helping each other when appropriate, and we have 3 people who do that, games go off invariably to a very high level. When we don't, when we have one official, maybe with a little more experience than the other 2 officials, think that I and I alone am the sole adjudicator out here, then we have people who are undisciplined, who do not trust their partners, who don't make the extra pass, if you will, and are consistently making mistakes that need to be addressed by this office and me in particular.
So with the officials, making sure they only call what they see and they're not guessing or they're not thinking it might have been a foul or it might have been a violation. They're saying, I'm sure I saw that. Kind of related to that, is there, from a philosophical standpoint or from a league-wide standpoint, is there a position on whether or not it's better? Is it better to miss a call on a foul or a violation that occurred? Is that better than calling a foul or violation that did not occur? Is a correct no call or a missed call? Does that make sense? Is it better to miss something that actually happened?
I'll put you in the position of a coach who feels like his job is on the line. All right. Mm-hmm. And I come to you and say, I wasn't quite sure what happened on that, so I just decided to go ahead and call that.
Yeah. The old call something. The call something.
I came to you, or I came to you and said, Coach, I'm really sorry, Keith. I just didn't get into the right position, but I can't guess out here because I don't do very well when I guess.
Yeah.
One is an authentic response of genuineness that you're working hard, you're doing best to see everything that you can see, but there might have been something that I could not see based on maybe a shortcoming in my mechanics, maybe the complexity of the game, maybe there are many different reasons why an official may not see something and that I might be honest with a coach or a player and say, I did not see that. Now, if you say that 40 times a night, you're just not good enough to be an NBA referee. That's just a fact. But if I consistently am telling players and coaches, I didn't see all the play, but I just decided to take a stab at it, you can well imagine the lack of respect that would be garnered from that. And the best NBA officiating is done with a sense of authenticity to the game participants, an honesty, an approach to your work that says, yes, I was wrong on that play. Here's why I was wrong on that play after I saw the video. Or an honest approach of, I didn't get in position to see that play. Or someone stepped right in front of me. Listen, our players and coaches know who is lying and who is not just to get away from the moment. If you are authentic in this profession and you work at it and you reach levels of excellence, you will still fall short of perfection. Our players and our coaches invariably will accept your humanity if you are authentic with them. If you lie, if you tell them things that aren't true because you want to get past the heat of the moment, over time, over 25 years like I worked, they will find you out and they will correctly and rightly hold you accountable to that inauthenticity. I don't want it. I'm not going to preach it. And I am going to make sure that our officials are upright, forthright, and honest about their work. Even if it means telling someone, I didn't get a good look at that play, I'll continue to work hard.
Gotcha. Thank you. One of the points of education this season has been an increased focus on traveling, like we've been talking about. How do you think that's received or gone over in the preseason? And is this one of those things? I know sometimes the points of education, it feels like they wear off. Are we going to still keep seeing all these travels called as we go on and on into the season?
Well, it's my goal to see them keep going on as long as traveling continues to take place. Yeah. I think one of the things that often gets misconstrued, though, Keith, is the fact that we have the best coaching staffs and the best athletes in the world who, when you start to focus on something, they will coach their players. The players will take the time to then work on their footwork. So is it a goal or a hope that the coaching staffs work on footwork and we see less travels? Well, of course, that would be best for everyone. Is it the goal of this office to come out like gangbusters in October and November and then allow the same things we're calling in November that impact games to occur in April games and not call them? That would be fundamentally unfair to our game participants. We are going to continue to sequence our eyes to the gather, the pivot foot, the release of a legal dribble, and then the transfer our focus to the defensive player. And if that means in April we see the same amount of bad footwork or traveling violations occurring that we did in October, then I don't want it to fall off. If, however, that focus by the officiating staff, based on the competition committee's emphasis, if, however, that leads to good coaching and good extra practice time for our players for better footwork, and we see less travels, then yes, that would be a goal we would all be excited about. One of the ways that we'll find that out is to see how many non-calling corrects occur during that time frame. So the data will show us the way.
Yeah. So when you are prepping the officials for at least the increased focus on the traveling, the gather rule, or spelling out the gather rule, it seems like James Harden is one of those guys who has pushed the limits of the rules or has innovated within the confines of the rules, and him being so good and so popular maybe has caused the NBA to spell out like, this is the gather. What James Harden step back is doing is legal. So when you see something over the summer that's like, hey, James Harden has innovated a new 3-point shot, do you then study it or like alert the referees like, guys, James Harden's doing something new? Like, do you guys have to be proactive and like see these summer workout videos and say, all right, we need to be aware of this. He's at it again?
Well, the summer training videos, not so much, but definitely over the course of time, all good referees use past video work to hone their craft and to get better at training their eyes to see things. I do think that it's important to note that refereeing is often slightly behind the innovations of our game. And that's one of the you have to see it. The competition committee has to take note of it to start to decide. You know, years ago, we saw a same foot to same foot hop, I think, that Paul Pierce brought into our game to get through double teams that were coming. And we realized that hopping in the NBA game is not legal. And so you have to see that, and you're slightly behind that before, the stakeholders of our league can rule on that. That being said, I think it's important to remember that innovation is just that. It's innovation within the rules. Nowhere in our rule book does it state that two steps has to go towards the basket or in a direct line. So when we had people, Zarco and Sharunas Marciulionis coming into our league, and they were taking two steps that was one forward and one sort of the left or right and forward, but it was still just two steps, we have to acknowledge that innovation is part of two steps, just like two steps sideways is still within the rule. Two steps backwards, still within the rule. What we did have to do, though, is to define that gather so that we know when the starting point of those two steps is about to take place. That is the part that had to get refined because of the innovation of our players. And it's not just James. We have many players that are utilizing this. C.J. McCollum, Damian Lillard in Portland. We have Luka in Dallas. We have Trae Young in Atlanta. Because the game has been innovated and it's an effective move, we see many players starting to use this move. Therefore, the clarification on our part isn't for one player. It's for the innovation of the game in which we're going to see more of that similar action because it's effective. And when something is effective in the NBA, it's going to get copied if it's effective and legal. And until the rule is overhauled, which there's no impetus to do so, these are legal moves and an exciting part of the NBA game right now. Now, that's not to say that there isn't sometimes a third step that's interjected in there because the foot or the rhythm is slightly off. And that's the complexity of what being an NBA referee is all about, is being able to take complex plays and properly adjudicate the rule as you see in live action.
Yeah, if I want to praise NBA refs, I often do that on the replays. I'm like, guys, look, you're watching it in slow mo, and that one was actually right. Like they're nailing these. It's
right.
It's crazy how hard it is. I really think you guys should, I don't know, maybe put it in NBA 2K, like have a referee training thing where people just get to call the games from the floor perspective. Like, nope, you got that travel wrong as well. That one was legal. I think it's cool.
That might be a fun thing to do.
Yeah, try it out. I think it's actually great too how the referees that same foot hop, like hopping on your right foot twice in a row, that was something that was in the NBA, and then now it's not. Like the referees were very consistent, got rid of it, and it was a thing. I guess as a viewer, I didn't even notice was illegal, and then you guys were like, no, this is not right. Like, oh yeah, I see it. They got it. It's out of the game. I have one question about the Euro step. Is it spelled out how slow the Euro step can be? Like, as long as you're still moving. I ask for a guy like Kyle Anderson. Sometimes it looks like he's come to a complete stop on the first one, and you're like, no, I guess he's still moving. He's still moving.
Well, I'm not going to comment on Kyle. Kyle has been very good to me, so we'll keep him out of the discussion. That being said, there is no pace to it. You can't come to a pause or a stop clearly and end your dribble and then restart it, or end your two steps and then restart your steps halfway through. I mean, that's clear, but there is no speed component to it.
I guess one final thing I think is interesting that we've learned about basketball based on now seeing replays in like HD replays. This happened at the end of the NCAA title game. I believe it also happened in a finals game where when a defender knocks the ball out of the offensive player's hand, for all of the history of basketball, that was basically out of bounds on the defender who knocked the ball out of his hands. Now we've seen in slow motion, on frame by frame slow motion, perhaps imperceptible to the human eye at real speed, that a lot of the time the ball actually grazes the offensive player's fingers. Is that something that the competition committee would look at and say, you know what, that should still be the offensive player's ball because something about... I don't know what you would do, because it used to be that was off of the defense, and now we see it. When I play pickup, I'm like, no, that's off you. I've seen the replays in NBA games, and that definitely hit the tips of your fingers after I hit it.
Well, listen, the competition committee did discuss that, and one of the things that's a real dilemma is if you're going to say that, and then we have the use of instant replay, how do you go over and look at visual evidence under instant replay and then say, yeah, but we're going to ignore that here this time.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the real dilemmas. And our league is very comfortable, at least the coaches have made clear to us that the league is very comfortable with, okay, for 46 minutes, we get that the visual eye can't see it, but that we have instant replay in the last 2 minutes, and that's just the nature of it. And instant replay and frame by frame is beyond real-time people's vision. We understand that. But as long as everyone agrees that they are comfortable with that, then it's fair for everyone. And that's where we currently are at the NBA. Could it be revisited in the future? Of course it could. But under the conditions that everyone is comfortable now, at least the game participants, we have a system that they are very comfortable with and don't wish to be changed.
Yeah, I'm almost leaning. I've read some articles, people opining that instant replay should be all real speed. Like it should be replay, but not slow mo. Like if the human eye can't see it, why are we so worried about it? But I know that's again, I guess, a philosophical question of what do you prefer? Finally, wrapping up, Monty, I know you're you're a man of diverse interests. A simple Google search turns up that you do a lot of different things, be it antique photography. Maybe I think I read you were starting to play the trumpet. I want to know if you've picked up any.
I'm trying.
Any
I'm
new
not
hobbies.
very good at it, Keith. No one's going to accuse me of being a trumpet player, that's for sure.
I want to know what you've done. Have you picked up anything new in the last year?
No, I haven't. The trumpet is maddening enough. I tend to try to only take things that frustrate me to a certain level before I add more things that frustrate me to a certain level. I am trying to learn certain things. I think the NBA is an incredible place to apply a craft, to apply a passion. I work really hard at making sure refereeing is something that the ideals of fairness and integrity and character are implemented into NBA games. That being said, I think there are opportunities to grow ourselves outside of how we view ourselves through work. I've enjoyed making a quilt for my son that took me 8 years, almost 11,000 pieces that I hand stitched on planes and in hotel rooms. And so I often take on something that challenges me. Right now it's trumpet. I continue to do the glass plate photography when time allows. But those are things that fill up a good amount of discretionary time, which in this position, I don't have as much discretionary time as I used to as a referee. But that's all right. The work is good. The people I work with here in NBA offices, Gael Romaine, Matt Futterman, Joe Liebeskin, John Ziza, Jake Mendes, I can keep listing names, Matty Augustin. That's invigorating. And when you work around good people to serve a game as beautiful as the NBA game, then you have the real opportunities to think that you're impacting something that is vital to humanity, which I think character and fairness and integrity are vital to us as people. And to be in a profession that allows to ply in those ideals every day, I feel very fortunate in. I also like to blast away on the trumpet in the privacy of my own home, which is the only place my trumpet playing is fit for right now. Maybe in the future that will change.
Well, Monty, thank you so much for spending so much time with me and patiently explaining rules to me and listening to my otherwise, I guess, complaints and such. Again, I appreciate it. And I'll say look forward to having you back on sometime.
I always enjoyed it. It was a fortuitous moment to meet you, and I'm glad that it has borne fruit for both of us. Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks to Monty. Thanks to the NBA for allowing him to come on the podcast again. If you want to support our show, help pay for these afternoons I take off to prepare and deliver these episodes, you can do that at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. If you sign up over there, you get access to exclusive bonus content, including behind-the-scenes looks, some little extra videos, extra bonus episodes. Also, remember, if you're interested in placing some sports wagers, you can do that at mybookie.ag and use our code BREAKFAST to get a free deposit match. They will match your deposit 100%. Also, announcement-wise, I have to remind people, I started a Grizzlies-only podcast. It's on its own feed, Grits and Grinds. Make sure you subscribe to that and whatever your favorite podcast app is. And if you're in the Nashville area, on Friday, October 25th, we're hosting a Memphis Grizzlies watch party. We will be giving out free prizes, and your first drink is free. That's at the Mainstay in Nashville. At the Mainstay on Friday, October 25th, a Memphis Grizzlies Nashville watch party with free giveaways and a free beer, courtesy of us. All right, thanks for checking out the show. You guys are the best. And remember, breakfast is the most important thing.
Yeah, never apologize for being G&G. Fair break, man. You understand?